Everyone mocked the CEO for marrying his fat maid. Whispers, laughter, and cruel stares followed them everywhere. To the world, it looked like a powerful man throwing away his status on a woman nobody respected. But what no one knew was the secret she carried, hidden until their wedding night. Behind her quiet eyes was a truth strong enough to shatter every insult and turn mockery into shock. Was she hiding a beauty no one dared imagine? A fortune no one expected? Or a power even greater than the CEO himself? When the truth is revealed, the same people who laughed will be begging for her forgiveness. What will she reveal on that wedding night? And will it change everything? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The bitter winter wind howled through the narrow streets of Silver Creek, Colorado, whipping snow against weather-worn buildings. Jonas Callahan pulled his worn leather coat tighter, his boots crunching through fresh powder as he made his way toward the general store. After months alone in his mountain cabin, he'd finally run low enough on supplies to brave the trek down. A commotion near the town square caught his attention. A crowd had gathered, their muttering carrying on the wind. Jonas's weathered face creased with concern as he approached, his gray-streaked beard collecting snowflakes. "Step right up." A red-faced man swayed at the center of the crowd, whiskey bottle clutched in his mittened hand. "4 healthy young'uns, ready to work. Who'll give me enough for a case of whiskey?" Jonas's stomach turned as he saw them, 4 children huddled together against the cold. The oldest girl, thin but fierce-eyed, held a toddler wrapped in a threadbare blanket. A boy about 10 stood protective at her side, while a smaller girl pressed her face into her sister's skirt. "Emma, here's 12. Good with cooking," the trader slurred. Grabbing the girl's arm, she jerked away, dark eyes flashing. The boy Caleb strong, good worker. Little Ruthie's sweet as pie, and baby Micah hardly makes a peep. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one stepped forward. These were hard times. Extra mouths meant less food for everyone. $5 for the lot. The trader's voice grew desperate. "Can't feed 'em myself no more. If nobody wants 'em, I'll leave 'em to the wolves." The little one, called Ruthie, began to cry softly. The boy, Caleb, balled his fists, though his lips trembled. Something deep in Jonas's chest cracked open, a feeling he hadn't let himself know since Sarah died bringing their stillborn son into the world. Without conscious thought, he stepped forward, reaching for the money pouch at his belt. $5, he said, his deep voice cutting through the whispers. The crowd turned to stare at the mountain man they rarely saw in town. Laughter erupted from several onlookers. "Old Jonas is gone soft in the head," someone called out. "4 more mouths to starve up on that mountain." The trader grabbed the coins eagerly, already turning toward the saloon. Emma watched Jonas warily, pulling her siblings closer. Jonas met her gaze steadily. "Come on," he said quietly, turning toward the path that led to higher ground. The children hesitated, but with night falling and the wind growing sharper, they had little choice. As they left the town's lights behind, Jonas heard Ruthie's teeth chattering. He stopped and shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her and the baby. Looking at their frightened faces in the gathering dusk, he spoke the only promise he could make. "You won't die out here. Not while I breathe." Dawn painted the Colorado sky in shades of pale rose and amber as Jonas loaded his mule-drawn sled. The wooden runners creaked against packed snow while he arranged worn blankets in the back, creating a nest of sorts for his unexpected charges. Emma stood rigidly beside the sled, her slim shoulders squared despite her exhaustion. She kept one hand on Micah, who squirmed in her arms, and the other on Ruthie's shoulder. The younger girl's eyes were red from crying through the night. "Ain't going in there till you tell us straight where we're headed," Caleb declared, trying to sound tough, though his voice quavered. Jonas secured the last rope before answering. "My cabin. Half-day's journey up the mountain, if the weather holds." He gestured to the sled. Best get in before the snow starts. We were bought and sold like cattle. Emma spat, though she helped Ruthie climb aboard. Don't expect us to be grateful. Fresh snowflakes began drifting down as Jonas urged the mule forward. The sled's runners cut clean tracks through yesterday's snow, winding ever upward through stands of pine and aspen. The children huddled together under the blankets, their breaths creating small clouds in the frigid air. You got any other kids up there? Caleb broke the silence, peering at Jonas's broad back. No. Wife? No. What happened to? Enough questions. Jonas cut him off, his voice gruff. Ruthie's whimper rose above the sled's creaking. My tummy hurts, Emma. The sun had climbed to mid-morning when Jonas halted beside a frozen creek. Time to eat, he announced, helping them down. While the children stamped their feet to warm them, he efficiently gathered dry wood and struck a fire. From his pack came strips of venison jerky and thick slices of cornbread. He handed them out, watching as the children tore into the food with desperate hunger. Even Emma couldn't hide her relief at the meal. Listen close now, Jonas said as they ate. Mountain's dangerous. Wolves hunt these slopes. You hear howling. You get inside quick. Storms blow up fast. Sky turns green. You run for shelter. No wandering off alone, ever. Emma studied him over her cornbread, noting his sure movements and the way he'd positioned them with their backs to a rock face, the fire between them and the open ground. Whatever else he might be, the man knew these mountains. The day wore on, snow falling steadier now. Micah fussed and cried until Jonas surprised them by producing a small carved wooden horse from his pocket. The toddler clutched it, eventually drifting to sleep against Emma's chest. Dusk was settling when Jonas pointed ahead. There. A rough log cabin took shape through the swirling snow, smoke curling from its stone chimney. The children pressed closer together in the sled, whispering. What if he's worse than the traitor? Ruthie breathed. We'll run if we have to. Emma whispered back, though uncertainty crept into her voice as she eyed the vast wilderness surrounding them. But maybe we wait and see. The heavy wooden door groaned as Jonas pushed it open, sending a shaft of fading daylight across worn floorboards. The children hesitated at the threshold, peering into what would now be their home. A stone hearth dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing shadows. A rough-hewn table with 4 mismatched chairs stood in the center, while shelves lined with preserved foods and supplies ran along another wall. Come in before you let all the heat out, Jonas said, ushering them inside. Emma stepped in first, still holding Micah close, her eyes darting to every corner as if searching for hidden dangers. Caleb and Ruthie followed, their shoulders touching as they moved. Above the mantel hung a simple wooden cross, its surface smoothed by years. Beside it, propped in a corner, sat a worn fiddle case covered in a fine layer of dust. Jonas's eyes skipped past it quickly, as he did every day. A colorful quilt, draped over a rocking chair, caught Ruthie's attention. She reached out to touch it, then pulled back when Jonas looked her way. Was your wife's, he said quietly, surprising them all by offering the information. Sarah made it the summer before. He trailed off, busying himself with stoking the fire. Jonas moved to the kitchen area, pulling dried rabbit meat and vegetables from his stores. Stew'll be ready soon enough, he said, filling a pot with water from a bucket. The children began a cautious exploration of their new surroundings. Caleb examined the sturdy walls, while Ruthie discovered a shelf of books. Micah toddled after Emma, who kept a watchful eye on Jonas as he worked. When the stew began bubbling, Emma approached the hearth. I can help, she offered stiffly. I know how to cook. Jonas nodded, stepping aside to let her check the pot. She stirred carefully, testing the vegetables for tenderness. When it was ready, she insisted on serving everyone herself, measuring each portion with careful precision. Got to be fair, she explained, though there was plenty to go around. Everyone gets the same. Jonas watched them eat, noting how they tried to pace themselves despite their obvious hunger. He remembered Sarah doing the same thing during that first lean winter they'd spent in the cabin. The memory caught in his throat like a fishbone. The children's eyes grew heavy as darkness fell. Jonas pulled extra quilts from a trunk, laying them out near the hearth. Sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we'll sort proper beds. They nestled together like a litter of puppies, with Emma on the outside, positioning herself between her siblings and Jonas. Soon their breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, though occasional sniffles and muffled sobs broke the quiet. Jonas sat in Sarah's rocking chair, watching the fire's dying embers. What did he know about raising children? He could barely keep his own ghosts at bay some nights. Yet here they were, 4 lost souls delivered to his door. He ran a rough hand over his face, listening to their quiet weeping, wondering if he'd done right by them, or if he was just adding his own brand of misery to their already heavy load. Dawn crept through the cabin's small windows, painting golden squares on the wooden floor. Ruthie stirred first, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She spotted a dented tin cup on the low table near the hearth and picked it up, turning it over in her small hands. The metal caught the morning light, making patterns on the wall that she chased with her fingers. Emma woke next, immediately taking stock of their surroundings. Without a word, she began gathering the bowls from last night's supper, stacking them carefully. Ma always said a clean home makes for a clean heart, Emma said softly, more to herself than anyone else. She found a worn cloth and began wiping down the rough-hewn table with practiced movements. Jonas watched from his chair, where he dozed fitfully through the night. There's a bucket of fresh water by the door, he offered. As the morning wore on, the children's natural curiosity got the better of their caution. Ruthie discovered a leather-bound hymn book tucked away on a shelf, its pages yellow with age. Caleb found a patchwork shawl folded carefully in a trunk, its colors still bright despite the years. Who's the lady in the picture? Emma asked suddenly, pointing to a small daguerreotype partially hidden behind the cross. Jonas's face tightened, the pain as fresh as it had been 5 years ago. He stayed silent so long that Emma began to apologize, but he finally spoke. That's Sarah, my wife. Where is she now? Ruthie asked innocently. Gone. Jonas's voice was rough. Died bringing our baby into the world. Both of them did. He stood abruptly, moving toward the door. Lost my faith that day. Figured God had turned his back on me, so I turned mine on him. The silence that followed was heavy until Jonas cleared his throat. Wood needs chopping. Caleb, come help. Outside, Jonas demonstrated the proper stance, the way to swing the axe. Caleb watched eagerly, bouncing on his toes until Jonas finally let him try. The axe was nearly as tall as the boy, and his first swing went wild. Jonas's strong hands caught the handle just in time, steadying both the axe and the startled boy. Easy there, Jonas said, his voice gentler than before. Like this. He guided Caleb's hands into the correct position, showing him how to control the swing. The boy's face lit up with pride when he finally split a small log. That evening, as they sat around the table eating a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Emma began humming quietly as she helped Micah with his spoon. The melody floated through the cabin, sweet and familiar. Jonas's spoon clattered to the table as recognition struck him like lightning. It was Amazing Grace, Sarah's favorite hymn, the one she'd sung every evening as she rocked in her chair by the fire. He stared at Emma, his hands trembling slightly as the notes wrapped around him like a ghost's embrace. The fire popped and crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the cabin's weathered walls. Emma's humming grew stronger as she gently rocked Micah, the familiar hymn flowing more confidently from her lips. Jonas's face drained of color, and his trembling hand caused ripples in his cup of coffee. Where? His voice cracked, and he had to clear his throat before continuing. Where did you learn that song? Emma's fingers absently stroked Micah's dark curls as she answered. Ma used to sing it every night when she tucked us in. Even when she got real sick with the fever, she'd still hum it. Her voice softened. Said it was God's way of telling us he was watching over us, even in the dark times. Ruthie nodded eagerly from her spot by the fire. She taught us all the words. Even Caleb knows them, though he pretends he don't like singing. Jonas set his cup down carefully, his eyes distant. Sarah, my wife, she sang that same hymn every evening before bed. Would sit right there in that rocker you're in now, Emma, watching the sunset through the window and singing Amazing Grace clear as a mountain stream. The children fell quiet, sensing the deep well of sadness in Jonas's words. Without speaking, he stood and crossed to the corner where the old fiddle case lay gathering dust. His hands shook as he opened the latches, lifting out the instrument that hadn't felt his touch since Sarah died. The bow creaked as he drew it across the strings, testing. A few discordant notes rang out before his fingers remembered their path. Then, slowly, the melody began to take shape. Hesitant at first, like a flower pushing through snow, but growing stronger with each measure. The music filled every corner of the cabin, bittersweet and beautiful. Tears rolled unchecked down Jonas's weathered cheeks as he played, but his eyes held something beyond grief, now a glimmer of peace, perhaps, or healing. Emma watched him intently, rocking in gentle time with the music. Caleb had edged closer to Jonas, fascinated by the way his fingers danced across the strings. Even little Micah had grown still, soothed by the melody. As the last note faded into the firelit shadows, Emma leaned close to Caleb, who had settled on the floor beside her rocker. Maybe God sent us here for a reason, she whispered, watching as Jonas bowed his head over the fiddle, shoulders shaking with silent tears. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and outside, snow began to fall, each flake catching the lamplight like a star. The mountain winter settled into a steady rhythm as days stretched into a week. Morning sunlight found Jonas teaching the children their new roles in maintaining the cabin's delicate balance of survival. Each small task became a lesson in mountain life, and slowly the children began finding their places. Caleb eagerly shadowed Jonas to the snare lines, his eyes bright with determination as rough hands guided his smaller ones in setting the wire loops. Like this? He'd ask repeatedly, adjusting the placement until Jonas gave a satisfied nod. By the fourth day, Caleb had caught his first rabbit all on his own, pride beaming from his face. Emma took to the daily chores with fierce determination, though her independent streak often clashed with Jonas's way of doing things. Ma showed me a better way, she'd declare, chin lifted in defiance. Jonas learned to step back, watching as she worked with capable hands at the cook stove or organized their meager supplies with careful precision. Little Ruthie became Jonas's constant companion, trailing him like a second shadow as he went about his tasks. Her small boots would crunch in the snow behind him as he chopped wood or tended to the mules. "Can I help, Pa?" she'd ask, the words slipping naturally from her lips, though it made Jonas's heart catch every time. One afternoon, Emma watched Jonas preparing his usual stew, her nose wrinkling slightly at his simple approach. "We need herbs," she announced, disappearing outside to return with handfuls of dried plants she'd spotted earlier. "Ma taught me which ones are good for cooking, even in winter." She crumbled them into the pot, the familiar sense of sage and wild thyme filling the cabin. Jonas took a spoonful of the improved stew, surprise crossing his weathered features. "Your ma taught you well," he admitted quietly, earning a rare smile from Emma. The trust between them grew in small moments, when Jonas steadied Caleb after a slip on ice without scolding, when Emma found her mother's hymnal carefully placed beside her bed, when Ruthie's nightmares were soothed by Jonas's gentle humming of the now shared song. That evening, as steam rose from bowls of Emma's herb-enhanced stew, the children automatically bowed their heads. Emma's voice wavered slightly as she spoke the grace her mother had taught them. Dear Lord, thank you for this food and for watching over us. Amen. Jonas didn't bow his head or close his eyes, but his hands stilled on the table as he listened to the simple prayer. Emma glanced at him cautiously, but there was no mockery in his expression, only a quiet thoughtfulness as the familiar words filled the warm cabin. Dark clouds rolled across the mountain sky like a heavy wool blanket. Being pulled over the Sunday, Jonas's axe swung in steady rhythm, splitting logs for the woodpile beside the cabin. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the biting cold. Emma stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes tracking the threatening clouds. Mr. Callahan, she called out, worry creeping into her voice. Those clouds look dangerous. Ma always said clouds that color mean trouble's coming. Jonas paused, studying the darkening sky. Years of mountain living had taught him to respect such warnings. Get inside, he ordered, gathering the split wood. Help me board up the windows. The storm hit with devastating force. Wind howled through the mountain passes like a hungry wolf, rattling the cabin's sturdy logs. Jonas worked quickly, nailing spare planks across each window, while snow began falling in thick, angry sheets. Inside, Emma gathered her siblings close to the hearth. It's just a storm, she soothed, though her own heart raced at the ferocity outside. Ruthie buried her face in Emma's skirts, while Caleb tried to look brave. Baby Micah whimpered, sensing the tension. 3 days passed, and the blizzard showed no signs of weakening. Their food stores dwindled dangerously low, down to a handful of dried beans and 2 strips of jerky. Jonas paced the cabin like a caged bear, watching the children's hungry faces with growing desperation. I have to try, he announced on the 4th morning, pulling on his heaviest coat. There's a deer trail not far. Maybe I can find something. You'll freeze out there, Emma protested, but Jonas was already checking his rifle. The whiteout beyond the door swallowed him whole. Hours passed with no sign of return. Emma kept the fire blazing, straining to hear anything beyond the storm's fury. When the door finally burst open, Jonas stumbled in, covered in ice, his lips blue and fingers stiff around his empty rifle. Caleb, help me, Emma commanded, rushing to catch Jonas before he collapsed. Together, they dragged him to the hearth. Emma worked frantically, rubbing his frozen hands, while Caleb piled every blanket they owned around him. They huddled together through that endless night, sharing body heat beneath the blankets. Emma hummed their mother's hymn softly, the familiar melody steady against the storm's rage. Micah curled against Jonas's chest, while Ruthie and Caleb pressed close on either side, their combined warmth slowly bringing life back to his rigid limbs. As dawn broke on the 5th day, the wind's howl finally began to fade. Weak sunlight filtered through the cracks in the boarded windows. Jonas lay pale, but breathing steadily, wrapped in quilts near the dying fire. Emma rocked Micah gently, her mother's hymn never leaving her lips as she watched over their unlikely family, bound together by survival and growing love. The mountain air felt crisp and clean after the storm's fury. Inside Jonas's cabin, Emma stirred a pot of bean soup while Ruthie and Caleb played quietly with wooden figures Jonas had carved. Baby Micah crawled on a quilt near the hearth, babbling happily. A sharp knock at the door made them all jump. Emma instinctively gathered her siblings closer, while Jonas reached for his rifle. Callahan? You alive in there? A gruff voice called out. Jonas relaxed slightly, recognizing the voice. It's the McGraws, he explained to the children, before opening the door. The neighboring ranchers, bundled in thick coats, stood on the threshold with loaded baskets. Mrs. McGraw's eyes widened at the sight of the children, though she tried to hide her surprise behind a polite smile. Heard you'd taken in some strays, Mr. McGraw said, stamping snow from his boots. Thought we'd check if you survived that storm. Mrs. McGraw bustled inside, setting down her basket. Brought you some bread and preserves. And, she hesitated, studying Emma's worn dress. Some old clothes that might fit the little ones. Emma stiffened at being called strays, but managed a quiet, "Thank you, ma'am." The McGraws settled at the rough table while Jonas poured coffee. Mrs. McGraw couldn't stop glancing between Jonas and the children, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Town's been talking something fierce, Mr. McGraw finally said, his weathered face serious. "About you buying those orphans at auction. Some folks are saying it ain't proper, a single man taking in children like that." Emma's cheeks burned red. She busied herself with Micah, trying to hide how the words stung. "Martha Wilson's been telling everyone who'll listen that something ought to be done," Mrs. McGraw added, wringing her hands. "Says it ain't right, them living up here all alone with you." Jonas's cup hit the table with a sharp crack. "These children are mine now," he said, his voice low but firm. "Legal and proper. Anyone who wants to question that can come talk to me directly." The McGraws exchanged glances. Mr. McGraw nodded slowly, seeming to approve of Jonas's conviction, while his wife still looked uncertain. "Well, you've kept them alive through that monster storm, Mr. McGraw allowed. That's something." They didn't stay much longer, leaving behind their supplies and promises to visit again. Emma watched them go, their horses disappearing down the snowy trail. That evening, after the younger ones were asleep, Emma found Jonas by the fire. "Why did you defend us like that?" she asked softly. "To the McGraws, I mean. About belonging here." Jonas looked up from his whittling, his eyes gentle in the firelight. "Because no one should ever doubt you belong." The simple words wrapped around Emma's heart like a warm blanket, chasing away the chill of the town's gossip. Morning painted the mountain in delicate white frost, clinging to every pine needle and branch. Jonas stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching his breath cloud in the crisp air while Caleb bounced eagerly beside him, clutching a small axe. "Are you sure you want to help?" Jonas asked, adjusting his wool coat. "It's hard work, felling trees." "I can do it," Caleb insisted, puffing out his chest. "I'm strong enough." Jonas hid a smile, remembering his own boyhood determination. "All right then, follow me, and watch your step on the ice." They trudged through the crystalline forest, their boots crunching on frozen snow. Jonas had spotted a dead pine the day before, perfect for winter firewood. When they reached it, he showed Caleb how to check the lean of the trunk. "You always need to know which way it'll fall," Jonas explained, pointing out the subtle tilt. "That's the first rule of cutting trees." Caleb nodded seriously, hanging on every word. His small hands gripped the axe handle tight as Jonas demonstrated the proper stance. "Keep your feet apart, like this," Jonas showed him. "And always swing from here," he tapped his hip. "Not just with your arms." They worked together, Jonas guiding Caleb's smaller strikes while making the main cuts himself. Caleb's face glowed with pride at each chip of wood that flew. But as Caleb took a particularly enthusiastic swing, the axe handle caught awkwardly and cracked with a sharp snap. The boy froze, his face draining of color as he stared at the splintered wood. "I'm sorry," he blurted, backing away. "I didn't mean to break it." Jonas saw the fear in the boy's eyes, the expectation of anger, of punishment. His heart ached, wondering what hardships had taught this child to expect the worst. "Hey now," Jonas said gently, kneeling to Caleb's level. "That old handle was getting weak anyway. You know what? This gives us a chance to make a new one together. I'll show you how to shape it from hickory." Caleb's eyes widened in surprise, then hope. "Really? You're not mad?" "Course not. You were working hard. That's what matters. I'm proud of your effort." Caleb's whole body seemed to relax, a smile breaking across his face. "Thanks, Pa." The words slipped out naturally, hanging in the frosty air between them. Caleb immediately blushed crimson, looking mortified. Jonas felt his throat tighten with emotion. In that simple word, walls he'd built since losing his wife began to crumble. He squeezed Caleb's shoulder, unable to speak for a moment. That evening, Caleb practically danced around the woodpile, showing Emma the logs they'd brought back. "Look what we cut, Jonas. He showed me how to do it right and everything." Emma watched her brother's excitement, noting the way Jonas smiled at the boy with genuine warmth. She'd been so focused on protecting her siblings, she hadn't noticed how Jonas had begun protecting them too in his own quiet way. For the first time, she let herself consider that maybe, just maybe, they truly could find a home here. The wagon creaked through fresh snow as Jonas guided the mules down the mountain trail toward town. Emma sat beside him, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, while Caleb bounced excitedly in the back, pointing at everything they passed. It was their first trip to town since that fateful auction day 2 months ago. "Remember," Jonas said quietly, "stay close to me in town. Some folks ain't kind to strangers." Emma nodded, her shoulders tensing as the first buildings came into view. The street was busy with morning traffic, miners heading to work, women carrying baskets, children running errands. But as their wagon rolled past, conversations stopped. Heads turned, whispers started. "There's that mountain man and his bought children. Paid $5 for the lot, like they was cattle. Ain't natural. A single man raising girls." Emma's cheeks burned red, but she held her head high. Jonas gripped the reins tighter, his knuckles white. Outside the general store, a group of men lounged against the hitching post, passing a bottle between them. One swayed on his feet as the wagon approached. "Well, if it ain't the auction girl," he called out with a cruel laugh. "How much you worth now, sweetheart?" Before Emma could react, Jonas was off the wagon. He grabbed the drunk man's collar and shoved him back against the post. "You watch your mouth," Jonas growled, his voice dangerously low. The drunk man's eyes widened in fear as Jonas's grip tightened. For a moment, Emma saw raw fury in Jonas's eyes. Then he took a deep breath and released the man. "Come on," Jonas said to Emma and Caleb, his voice steady again. "We've got supplies to buy." Inside the store, Emma helped Jonas select flour, sugar, and medicine for Ruthie's lingering cough. She tried to ignore the stares, but couldn't help overhearing 2 women talking by the fabric bolts. "Lawyer from Denver's been asking questions. Custody claims. Seeing as there was no proper adoption. Might be better off in a proper orphanage." Emma's hands trembled as she counted out coffee beans. The thought of being separated from her siblings made her stomach churn with fear. She glanced at Jonas, who was examining bottles of cough syrup, and saw his jaw clenched tight. He'd heard too. The ride home was quiet, snow starting to fall in lazy flakes. Emma hugged herself, watching Jonas's broad back as he handled the reins. Finally, she gathered her courage. "Will you fight for us if they try to take us?" Her voice quavered, despite her attempt to sound brave. Jonas turned to look at her, his eyes fierce with determination. "With my life," he answered firmly, and in those 3 words, Emma heard the promise of home. Emma woke to Micah's weak cry in the darkness. Something was wrong. His tiny body burned against her hand as she touched his forehead. Terror gripped her heart. She'd seen fevers take children in the orphanage before. "Jonas!" she called out, her voice cracking. Heavy footsteps crossed the cabin floor as Jonas hurried over with a lantern. "He's burning up," Emma whispered, cradling Micah close. The toddler's face was flushed red, his curls damp with sweat. "We need yarrow tea and cool cloths. Mama taught me." Jonas nodded grimly. "I'll get snow from outside. You start the tea." Emma moved with practiced efficiency, just as her mother had shown her. She measured dried yarrow leaves into a cup, while Jonas filled a bucket with fresh snow. Ruthie and Caleb huddled in their beds, watching with worried eyes as their sister worked. Here, Emma instructed, laying out clean rags. We'll wrap the snow in these and put them on his chest and forehead. Her hand shook slightly, but her voice remained steady. The tea needs to steep for 5 minutes exactly. Jonas followed her directions without question, his weathered face tight with concern. They worked together through the night, changing the snow rags whenever they grew warm, coaxing sips of tea between Micah's parched lips. As midnight passed, Emma noticed Jonas's lips moving silently. She watched him for several minutes before realizing he was praying. The same man who'd told them he'd lost his faith years ago was now desperately whispering prayers over her baby brother. "Why do you pray if you don't believe?" Emma asked softly, adjusting the cool cloth on Micah's forehead. Jonas's hands stilled. He looked down at Micah's flushed face, then met Emma's questioning gaze. "I don't know," he admitted roughly. "I tell myself I stopped believing when Sarah died. But nights like this..." He shook his head. "I can't seem to stop the prayers from coming." Emma reached across Micah to squeeze Jonas's calloused hand. "Maybe that means something." They continued their vigil as the hours crept by. Jonas paced the cabin floor with Micah while Emma brewed more tea. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, an owl called into the night. Finally, as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, Micah's breathing grew easier. His skin felt cooler to the touch, and his sleep became peaceful rather than fitful. Emma nearly cried with relief when he took a proper drink of water. Jonas sank into the old rocking chair, still holding Micah against his chest. The baby snuggled into his shoulder, one tiny hand clutching Jonas's shirt. Emma watched as Jonas's eyes grew heavy, his body relaxing as exhaustion took over. Within minutes, both man and child were sound asleep. Their breathing matched in perfect rhythm as morning light spilled across the cabin floor. Jonas tracked a deer's prints in the fresh snow, moving silently through the forest near the cabin. The morning sun glinted off ice-covered branches, and his breath frosted in the cold air. He'd promised Emma venison stew for supper, and the children needed the meat to stay strong through winter. The crack of a branch made him freeze. That wasn't deer movement. Through the trees, he spotted 2 riders making their way up the narrow mountain trail toward his cabin. His heart sank as he recognized them, the drunken trader who'd sold him the children, accompanied by the town's deputy. Jonas abandoned the hunt and rushed back through the woods, taking a shorter path he knew would get him there first. His boots crunched in the snow as he ran, praying the children were inside. As he burst into the clearing, he saw Emma hanging laundry while Caleb and Ruthie played in the yard. "Inside, all of you," he called sharply. The children's heads snapped up at his tone, and they hurried to obey. Jonas grabbed his rifle from beside the door, just as the riders emerged from the trees. The trader swayed in his saddle, face red from whiskey despite the early hour. "Callahan," he shouted, "come to collect what's rightfully mine." Jonas positioned himself in front of the cabin door, rifle held ready but not aimed. "These children aren't property to collect," he said firmly. The deputy urged his horse forward, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Callahan, there's been complaints. You've got no legal claim to these orphans. No adoption papers, no guardian rights." "I paid fair and square," Jonas growled. "For their care, maybe," the deputy said. "But you can't just buy children. They need to be placed proper-like, through official channels." Emma's voice rang out from behind Jonas. "No," she squeezed past him onto the porch, clutching her mother's hymn book to her chest. "We're family now. God brought us here." The trader spat in the snow. "God ain't got nothing to do with it, girl. You're coming back to town. The Lord works in mysterious ways," Emma declared, her voice trembling but determined. She opened the hymn book to show the deputy. "This was Jonas's wife's book. It has the same songs my mama taught me. That's not chance, that's providence." The deputy studied Emma's fierce expression, then looked at Jonas standing protectively before his cabin. His face softened as understanding dawned. "Maybe," the deputy said slowly, "I could help you file proper guardianship papers, make things legal and proper." "Now wait just a minute," the trader protested, but the deputy cut him off. "These children look well cared for," the deputy said firmly, "better than they were in your care. We're leaving now." The trader opened his mouth to argue, but the deputy had already turned his horse. With a final threatening glare, the trader followed, shouting back, "This ain't over, Callahan." That night, after the children were fed and the cabin was quiet, Jonas gathered them around the fire. His voice was gruff with emotion as he spoke. "What Emma said today, about family and God's will, it got me thinking. You're not mine just because I paid that man's price. You're mine because I promised to protect you, care for you, love you as my own. That's worth more than any coin." The fire crackled softly in the hearth as Jonas paced the wooden floorboards, his stockinged feet making quiet thuds in the midnight silence. Sleep eluded him, his mind churning with thoughts of the trader's threats and the deputy's promise of help. The children lay curled under quilts near the warmth of the fire, their faces peaceful in slumber. Then, Emma's clear voice rose in the darkness, starting soft but growing stronger with each note of the familiar hymn. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," she sang, her voice trembling slightly. One by one, her siblings stirred and joined in, Caleb's earnest tenor, Ruthie's sweet high notes, even little Micah humming along. Jonas's hands shook as he reached for the fiddle case he'd kept closed for so long. The latches clicked open, and he lifted out the instrument, its wood gleaming in the firelight. He drew the bow across the strings, testing, then joined their song. His deep voice, rusty from disuse, found its way back to the melody his wife had loved so dearly. The hymn swelled, filling every corner of the cabin with harmony. Tears streaked down Jonas's weathered cheeks as he played, watching these children, his children now, singing their hearts out. Something broke loose inside him, a dam of grief finally giving way to healing. Setting aside the fiddle, Jonas knelt beside them on the rough floor. "Lord," he prayed aloud, his voice thick with emotion, "I turned my back on you when Sarah died. But you didn't give up on me. You sent these little ones to show me your grace again. Thank you for making us a family." The last notes of the hymn faded away, leaving only the soft pop of burning logs and the whisper of snow against the windows. But the cabin glowed with more than firelight now. It radiated with the warmth of belonging, of hearts finally finding their home. The mountain air carried hints of warmth as Jonas and the children worked in the muddy yard. Winter's icy grip was finally loosening, bringing new life to their homestead. Jonas showed Caleb how to mend the broken fence posts, while Emma and Ruthie planted potato eyes in the freshly thawed soil. "Like this, Pa?" Caleb asked, holding the hammer with determined focus. The word Pa now came naturally to all of them, warming Jonas's heart each time he heard it. "That's right, son." Jonas nodded, steadying the post. "Nice and straight now." Little Micah toddled between them, carrying twigs in his chubby hands, trying to help in his own way. His happy giggles filled the air as he mimicked his older brother's movements with a stick. Emma wiped sweat from her brow, looking up from her gardening. "Ma always said potatoes were stubborn things," she said, grinning. "Just like some mountain men I know." Jonas chuckled, but his smile faded as he watched them work. The guilt that had been gnawing at him surfaced again. These children deserved better than a gruff widower who'd bought them off an auction block. What right did he have to call himself their father? Emma must have noticed his troubled expression. She stood up, brushing dirt from her skirts, and walked over to him. "Ma used to say something else too," she said softly. "She told us family isn't blood, it's who stays. And you stayed, Pa. You stayed when nobody else would." Jonas's throat tightened at her words. I want to make it proper, he said. Legal-like. Adopt you all, proper papers and everything. Later that evening, they gathered around the hearth. For the first time since Sarah's death, Jonas led them in prayer, his voice steady and sure. Lord, he began, as his children, truly his now in every way that mattered, knelt beside him, thank you for bringing us together as a family. The spring sunshine warmed their faces as Jonas and his children walked down the dusty main street of town. Emma held Micah's hand while Ruthie and Caleb walked proudly beside Jonas. Gone were the suspicious glares and cruel whispers that had haunted their earlier visits. Instead, townsfolk nodded respectfully, some even tipping their hats. Morning, Callahan family. Mrs. Peterson called from the general store porch. Her smile seemed genuine now, unlike the sneers of months past. Inside the lawyer's office, Jonas sat straight-backed. In a wooden chair, his children gathered close. Mr. Harrison, the town lawyer, spread the adoption papers across his desk. The paperwork's all in order, he said, adjusting his spectacles. Just need testimonials to your character. Right on time, the McGraws arrived, looking pleased to help. Jonas Callahan's got more goodness in his heart than most, Mrs. McGraw declared firmly. Those children are thriving under his care. Mr. McGraw added, never seen a man work harder to provide for his family. They belong together, plain and simple. That evening, back in their cabin home, Emma served up a hearty stew while Ruthie passed around fresh cornbread. After the dishes were cleared, Emma began to sing their hymn, the one that had once brought Jonas such pain. Now it filled him with joy as his children's voices joined in harmony. Jonas's deep voice blended with theirs, strong and sure. The melody floated out through the open window and across the valley, carrying their happiness to the darkening sky. His heart felt full, finally at peace. The lonely widower was gone, replaced by a father of 4 precious souls. God's grace had given him a second chance at love, healing his broken spirit through these children who now bore his name. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe and tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.